Yeah, I mean, it like rejuvenated me when I got my hands on it. I'd listened to folks like from GitHub and whatnot talking about what was coming with Copilot. It was even before they released. And they were like, wait till people see what's coming. And so that got me kind of excited and got me digging in even before the GPT stuff really landed. And then when that did, I quickly realized that everybody thought ChatGPT was AI, and actually doing this was going to be much more complicated than that. So yeah, I started just playing around integrating that stuff into Workday's products, and that inevitably led to, like kind of Eliza said, starting to figure out, all right, how are we actually going to scale this? And as product teams are figuring out how to get these things out, especially at companies like Workday, that's not trivial. There's, a lot of kind of layers to get through to make things like that happen. And so you have the first movers like Eliza figuring all that out, and we don't want everybody to have to do that over and over again. So that's part of where this team came up. But the other part of it was AI is overwhelming. So how can we make it easier for people to understand it and figure out how to get value from it?
This is Deployed, the AI product podcast, and I'm your host, Ian Cairns, co-founder and CEO of FreePlay. All right, welcome back to the show. Today we're joined by Eliza Cabrera and Beau Lyddon, who are at Workday. You probably know them, but in case you don't, they serve more than half of the Fortune 500, and they themselves are a Fortune 500 company. So this conversation is going to be particularly interesting for anybody who's either building with generative AI in an enterprise environment or building for enterprise customers. For context, Eliza is a principal product manager, and her team were one of the first to bring generative AI features all the way to production. Beau is an engineering leader on the platform side, where he's responsible for helping scale the adoption of generative AI in the organization. And so this conversation is going to be less about the tactics of evals and fine tuning and the details of working with AI systems, and more about the big picture of like, what does it take to figure out what products to build, how to solve data privacy and compliance problems, how to build trust with enterprise customers, how to solve some of the technical challenges, and ultimately how to scale education and the learning that needs to happen for multiple teams to adopt generative AI within an organization like Workday. They've done it. They've been able to build some of the first generation features. They're now doing more ambitious things like the Workday AI Assistant you'll hear more about. So it's a great story, and grateful to them for joining us. With that, we'll jump in. Thanks for listening. Hey, everybody. We're joined here today with Eliza Cabrera and Beau Lyddon from Workday. We're going to have a conversation about what they've been doing with Workday AI. And I'm going to let us get started by having them each introduce themselves. So, Eliza, could you go first? Tell us who you are, what you're up to at Workday, and then Beau, I'll let you do the same.
Definitely. Yeah, and first off, thanks for having us. Happy to be here. So I'm Eliza Cabrera, born and raised actually in Boulder. So Ian, Beau, we're all very close right here in Colorado. I am a principal product manager in employee experience products at Workday. And I think the short and sweet of what that means is that we build consumer-like experiences into enterprise products. I think no one, when they're thinking about enterprise, usually is thinking like awesome user experience. And so it's a great challenge. And I personally kind of love being in the space of just the operational complexity of the enterprise and actually delivering that software, and then having a really simple end user experience that kind of abstracts all of that complexity away. So in terms of the GenAI lens on things, being in the EX space, I actually was on a ski trip up in Steamboat and was playing with Bing Chat and was just floored, quite honestly, with the responses I was getting back with just an early version of that, the GPT 3.5. And so kind of took me on this path with the Help Generative AI offering at Workday. Was the first product to release to market alongside our job description use case. And I now work more on the platform side, the Assistant, which is our experience layer product that we're an early adopter with now. So Beau and I have worked really closely the past couple of years, especially. I work very much on the product side. So something interesting with Workday is we deliver both a product and we are a platform. And so it's been cool to work with Beau as they kind of build out the tooling and the platform experience to enable then teams across Workday to adopt generative AI technology. So Beau, I'll pass to you to intro.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, my story at Workday it seems like the story I have everywhere, where I come in to do product and inevitably end up on platform. Because I tend to get frustrated at how hard it is to do product. And yeah, started on kind of product issue teams at Workday, as a manager actually. And then started playing around with the AI stuff, got excited. To be honest, I was kind of burnt out with tech. That's a little bit of even why I was managing I was like, the technology stuff is kind of boring right now. And then AI got me.
Yeah, right. Like everybody's getting excited about it again.
Yeah, I mean, it like rejuvenated me when I got my hands on it. I'd listened to folks like from GitHub and whatnot talking about what was coming with Copilot. It was even before they released, and they were like, "Wait till people see what's coming." And so that got me kind of excited and got me digging in even before the GPT stuff really landed. And then when that did, I quickly realized that everybody thought ChatGPT was AI, and actually doing this was going to be much more complicated than that. So yeah, I started just playing around integrating that stuff into Workday's products, and that inevitably led to, like kind of Eliza said, starting to figure out, all right, how are we actually going to scale this? And as product teams are figuring out how to get these things out, especially at companies like Workday, that's not trivial. There's, a lot of kind of layers to get through to make things like that happen. And so you have the first movers like Eliza figuring all that out, and we don't want everybody to have to do that over and over again. So that's part of where this team came up. But the other part of it was AI is overwhelming. So how can we make it easier for people to understand it and figure out how to get value from it? So that's really what we try to focus on kind of our platform. So we're almost more like platform tooling. We don't necessarily provide the platform that customers see. We are an internal platform to help our own teams, whether platform teams or app teams, leverage AI.
No, that's awesome. And a lot of the things you just talked about are things I know we're going to get into in the discussion here. So all these topics around scaling, like how do you help a large enterprise really learn to use generative AI across your product portfolio? I know those are topics that lots of people that listen to this want to hear about. So we'll get into those in a bit. Maybe before we dig in too deep on the ops and platform side, I think it's especially cool to have, Eliza here. You're kind of the customer, you're the product side, you're building on the platform. Will you tell us just a couple examples? Like you mentioned, help product, you mentioned assistant. What are you all building? For people who know Workday, they probably generally know massive platform for HR generally. But what has this product experience looked like so far for your customers?
Definitely. Yeah. So we have a long history of kind of building with, especially machine learning, right? So over a decade of kind of that AI investment. And so one of the benefits we had when, ChatGPT came on the scene was to really leverage that platform that already existed. And then to say, okay, I'm kind of brass tacks PM of this is a technology. Like it's a super powerful technology, but like we've seen other technology waves come. And so at the end of the day, how do we leverage this to actually build something impactful for our customers and actually solve, right now, at least they've got a lot of the same problems. So how do we kind of leverage it that way? And so in terms of what we're building now, so for those who are less familiar with Workday, we provide a core HCM and finance sort of platform of products. So as I mentioned in the intro, we're both a platform. So we're extensible, we're configurable, but we also deliver out of the box products. So help as an example, when we're looking early days at where the capabilities work for GenAI, it made a lot of sense to look at our KB or knowledge management SKU, like kind of offering within the SKU, and to say, okay, content create makes a lot of sense. Translations make a lot of sense. And so we had a lot of those kind of products already existing. And so it was a lot more of how do we apply the technology in an impactful way there. I think what's been interesting in the past, couple of years now is that the shift from, okay, what do we do with this? How do we kind of boots on the ground figure out, like Beau was saying, early days, how do we take advantage of the technology to get sort of a product offering that makes sense to how do we scale this across teams, right? So early last year, and even Beau was before me with his knowledge of the, Gen AI, we wanted to be able to now kind of teach teams about how do they learn how to use the tech. Not everyone has time to, it can be a full-time job just trying to understand how to use the technology and then how to actually deliver it. So there's a big compliance element of that too. we can chat about as well. Yeah. Beau, what I miss?
I mean, yeah, I think that's a pretty good overview. I think to your point, I think the biggest change from like the ML era, I guess, to this generative AI era is then everything was like an upfront. I almost compare it to like pre-cloud to post-cloud. Of pre-cloud, you had to buy machines and build them out and do all that work. So there was already this upfront investment, which meant you immediately were kind of thinking, all right, the value here has to be justifiable. We need to know that it's going to be worth that upfront investment, right? And if you're going to make that upfront investment, you're probably going to go pretty all in. And so in those cases where we're applying ML, those are very dedicated projects and teams fully focused on that. And what was kind of happening, one, that was always hard because you're not always right in what you're investing in. So you might just completely miss. And it takes time to build those models, all of that type of stuff, right? So I think that's why we all got excited about generative AI, because all of a sudden now it's like, oh, we don't have to spend all this upfront time to even figure out if there's value. But I think to Lisa's point, there was a lot of learning, like getting that initial functionality out wasn't necessarily figuring out how to get value out. It wasn't the hardest part. It was delivering it and making sure it was good enough for our end users, and especially enterprise customers have very high expectations of data accuracy, and that type of stuff kind of became the bigger problem, at least from my perspective, of how are we ensuring we're delivering what they expect. All customers, but I think especially enterprise customers, will give you the most hypocritical statement of, where's your new stuff? Also, don't change anything. And so balancing that world is, and like I'm the same when I consume it. It's like, I want your new shiny stuff, but also I really like how it works today. That's why I'm using your product. So it's how do we square all of that and make sure we can give them what they want, but also make sure we don't ruin the experience and lose faith in customers. So it's like it pivoted from this very technical challenge to much more of a full business product challenge, at least from my perspective.
And was that specifically just even about like the help product that Eliza you initially brought to market? Is that what you were referring to about as well?
I feel like we're kind of talking about the overall Workday. Workday Illuminate is the platform now. We announced that at our customer event in September. So specific to the help product, just like a couple examples there. So translations. And originally when we started, we were like one-click translations. It's going to be amazing. You're going to translate all of your knowledge articles, and thinking that was sort of the right approach. There were some great learnings there around like that doesn't scale, but just because the overhead over time to manage, one-click translations, your content teams actually needed a lot more management behind that. And so GenAI was a part of it, right? So maybe I would say like 20-30% of the solution, but then the actual management of content with the GenAI really kind of seamlessly baked in is where we landed, and we're able to bring it to GA. Another use case there is for the help SKU specifically. We, and actually backing up for a sec, one of the things that we looked at early days was, okay, within this product, where are we going to have the most impact? And we also know that the market is shifting, the tech is shifting really fast. And so what we build now, we're seeing advancements in multimodal and the token limits, all of that early days those were problems that we were hitting up against. So we focused a lot on the data for help. How do we build out the best solution that enables the data set that's being curated and created within Workday to work really well? And the teams, we kind of aligned on, okay, let's solve problems in that vein. And the data in this case would be the knowledge articles, that content, the data that you would then use to bring into other experiences like the assistant that then lives as sort of the intelligence across the Workday platform. Just as an example there. Policy docs are another one I can dive into if it's helpful. Was the kind of second area that customers were screaming for, and we were able to build out in a really seamless way that was interesting.
Maybe that's a good one, but I think, if I were to imagine, I spend a lot of time talking to people that are in roles like yours at other big companies. And you all are ahead a bit, right? Like you've brought several things to market with generative AI. You figured out how to do that within a big enterprise. And like to Beau's point, with enterprise customers who have very high standards, right? So if that's a good one, Eliza, or if there's another one, like maybe you could just kind of like walk us through the process. And I'm sure people are curious, like, what did you all have to do that was, just pure technical? What was on the product side, figuring out what was possible? What was on the harder side, compliance, legal, customer buy-in, whatever else. Like, tell us the story of how one of the ones that really worked came to life. And I'm like just curious how you two work together on it too.
Totally. Yeah. So maybe taking us back to the hype cycle early last year, and you could see really quickly, right? Summarization, quick drafting. Are you able to kind of iterate, translate articles? Code gen was a thing as well, but that was less of what I'm kind of focused on. And so the team got together and was pretty clear about, we want to make sure that we're building something that, at the end of the day is not just a flashy demo that's going to actually be valuable. And so it honestly was coming back to our core kind of product principles. If I kind of am I was brought up on like the Teresa Torres, Marty Kagan side of product. And so we actually, we got in a Miro and did an OTS of the opportunity solution tree of, okay, at the end of the day, if we've delivered this to prod, we're seeing customers developing this, how do we make sure that what we're building is valuable? Right. And so just simple, I'll stick with KD since, your listeners probably are familiar with that, a kind of knowledge-based solution as part of maybe supporting cases or things like that.
Yep.
So
that's like a knowledge base, just for people that maybe aren't tracking, like it's a knowledge base that you all would serve to a people team, a finance team, to help them deliver better internal employee experience. Is that the scenario?
Yeah, totally. So, we're coming up on the end of the year. It's benefits enrollment for a lot of folks. And you might not be reading all of the policy docs, but you're going to read an article about the policy docs that your HR team has crafted. That's an example of, say, a help article. And so we wanted to help the content teams who are curating those to be able to create those faster, higher quality, to manage those. And what I think is interesting with Workday too is we deploy at global scale. So this isn't just in English. We're talking between 2-8. We support, up to 37 languages. And so how do we solve that problem, right, is really interesting, because one-click translation sounded great, but we hopped in with customers and they were like, this looks like a nightmare to manage over time. So in terms of figuring out the outcome there, as a team, we're saying, okay, we want to, I think it's really easy to overcomplicate metrics in the enterprise, I'll say at least, with you think you want all these things, but it also takes time to deploy, get them out to production, see what those metrics look like. And a lot of times, at least I've experienced, you get them out and then realize, oh, we didn't do the right one, or we wanted something different.
And I find the opposite too. It's like there's one that matters and you spend all this time instrumenting too many. Like I appreciate the problem.
Yeah. And so, a lot of it was, okay, how do we keep this as simple as possible, knowing that it's a complex problem? And at the end of the day, GenAI, at least my view is, GenAI is working if you're seeing that increased adoption. Are you seeing users coming back? Are you seeing them turning it off? Are you seeing your, administrators and, the buyers for the product, are they actually adopting this or are they not? And so it sounds really straightforward, but that can be a pretty good indicator combined with hopping on with some customers and understanding what's blocking them to figure out if it's working or not. So we were able to say, okay, if we see an increase in the volume of articles and have an identifier for whether or not they've been created with GenAI, then, or with AI, because translations isn't Gen necessarily, but you will be able to see if we're seeing an upward trend essentially in the articles that are created. And so after having that, then we're able to put in some metrics instrumentation to really measure cost as well of, okay, what does this look like for us to be, if you're uploading a 20-page PDF policy document, what's the cost there relative to the return that customers are getting from the help SKU itself? So that's a lot on kind of the product side of things. Getting it out to market as well, we were able to leverage a lot of the innovation approach that we have at Workday. So a lot of the machine learning kind of data processing and compliance, we were able to carry forward into generative AI because Gen AI is a subset, right, of the larger AI kind of get. And happy to go into that if it's helpful.
You have a platform that helps you with, like, you have platform components that help you with compliance already for other ML products you're able to use in this case.
We do. Yeah. So again, thinking like on the global landscape, you have different countries with different data processing requirements, regional level requirements. There's a lot of complexity there that we were able to leverage that framework, but the risk profile is higher with generative AI. And when you're looking at these kind of general purpose models as well, it totally changes. And there's a ton we've learned with customers too, because a lot of our larger customers, everyone's kind of going through this process together, right? But we're able to have our learnings we can share with them. A lot of them have their own AI kind of oversight boards and teams too. And so it's definitely a partnership to figure out how we get these things out into production and make sure that we're educating users about the GenAI tech that they're using, while it's in an experimental state.
Yeah. And maybe we can come back to that. Like, I think that could be a whole thing in and of itself. How do you educate your customers about this stuff? But so Eliza, you're telling the story about the product side, right? You were thinking through, what do we want to build for customers? What are the right metrics? How do we know if it's working? Like, how did you get this to market with, enterprise customers and choosing to use it? You hit a bunch of compliance stuff. Did you actually charge for this? Is this a separate SKU? Did this just, roll out as part of an existing SKU? How did you approach that part of it?
That is a great question. So the approach at Workday, we have a really kind of strong foundation, as I said, in implementing AI, but generative AI is experimental. And so we've taken a very, I would say, more measured approach to how we look at the technology. And right now, while we're looking for that sort of ROI, looking at measuring the kind of value prop of the technology, we're not going to charge customers for that.
Got it.
And so the generative AI was baked into the core SKUs that we have across Workday. And it's not something that we wanted to sort of upcharge for. If you're paying for the SKU, you should be getting the benefits of the technology as opposed to having sort of a bolt-on, AI add-on, because AI is the Workday Illuminate platform is a part of what you're buying when you buy Workday. So that was really kind of how we thought about it. And again, back to the cost and measurement there, we're really looking and kind of thinking about it in a more experimental way, knowing that the cycles in enterprise are pretty long. There's still more to learn there, but we didn't want to put that burden on customers, right, to come along the journey with us.
No, that makes sense. And then maybe Beau, could you tell us a little bit about the back end, the systems, the platform side, like everything that had to come to life? If I was hearing that, you all had to figure out, how did you onboard different, LLMs to Workday? There's some RAG system architecture that had to come to life there, I can imagine. But tell us, what all did you have to build, and how did you bring that initial stack to market?
Yeah, it's interesting because I would call out Eliza's help team is almost like a bridge team between the old way of ML and, like I said, kind of everything being very bespoke, to how do we platform and scale this so everybody has their quote, click a button and I get AI type capability. I think what was interesting about that team and who we honestly even tried to target at the beginning to do these, Eliza was almost calling experiments. Obviously there's product market fit, but it's also teams who are have a little more self-autonomy and a little more full stack, right? Every company, especially companies the size of Workday, have different kind of types of teams. And we definitely have, especially when you get into more the core product side, there's way more layers, and a team is way less likely to start all the way, be full stack, right? Have ownership of the product all the way down into the infrastructure. Eliza's team is somewhere kind of in between that, where they have the access and the ability to get to infrastructure, and then all the way up through the product side. But they were relying on the ML team, and we do Workday as a core ML team, and we had to figure out how to expose that. And so one of the first things immediately was all right, we already have our custom models. Let's just provide a platform where we can also expose these LLMs, give times to experiment, have ML kind of control. Like Lisa's point, they already know kind of the data rules and all of that anyway. So have them help inform us of what of these models are allowed within our customer expectations. And then we'll kind of try to figure that out as we go over time to make that much more kind of easy to figure out and easy to configure. Because there's kind of two levels to it. It's the product teams knowing what AI capabilities are available and their customers can use. And then there's exposing those concepts to the customers to make sure they can ensure that like, right, if they don't want the data to be exposed, we need to be able to turn that off. Right. And so like, we need to make things more configurable over time. To start with, it's much more kind of, more blunt licensing. But we want to obviously make that more nuanced over time. But to your point, we kind of followed along teams like Eliza's team and we're watching what they were doing. I mean, I kind of laugh back to the original days of Eliza, like, and I think this is a big challenge. And it was actually what got both Eliza and I excited. I know from like a product side, she's like, this is so amazing. I can just get in here and like put in input and get output and be like, this is exactly what I want in the product. And so she'd kind of send these prompts to the devs and go, hey, I think this is what we want. It's using, I think at the time, I don't remember what model it was, but I do remember like very quickly the model changed and her devs are like, oh man, now we have to go change the code because the model and the API changed and things were moving so fast that they were frustrated at the thrashing back and forth. So like that was one thing we observed. It's like, okay, great. ML's provided a platform, but even there, the APIs and things are changing so fast that we probably need to provide a better way for devs and product to collaborate and quickly get from that, I think I have a prompt into code experience, right? So providing more layers of abstraction there and providing, especially once again, like the stuff is complicated. People don't have time to get in there and like distinguish between all these LLMs and what's the nuances of this versus that. I mean, you have like some engineers who are like getting in there and tweaking with temperature and all of that. Most people aren't even getting near those types of things. They're struggling to even know what model to choose, let alone how I'm going to configure all those underlying pieces. And I think that's how we view it, is like, how can we provide kind of an out of the box, good enough, and then help over time kind of teach folks how to do that, both in the results we eventually get from data, but also can we build tooling to make that more kind of less technical, to be blunt. Like I shouldn't totally know if everybody here on our product and app teams have to know every precise detail about top K and temperature and all that. This isn't going to work. So it's like observing that type of stuff and going, okay, how can we speed that process up and help them get the delivery? And then that does get into all the other layers too, whether it's data compliance, all of that. Like we need to, once again, take what Eliza's team is doing there and figure out, okay, how can we make this a little more out of the box configurable, and give, and funny enough, one of the things actually Eliza made that wasn't even us, we are taking it as much as we can and tooling it, but she basically put together a guide for product teams of like, here are all the steps you probably need to go through to make sure what you've done can actually ship out to customers. And that's great for us because like at some level, I view that as somebody on the platform side is like, that's the beginning of a protocol. So now I can start to turn that into a protocol that I can start to codify in. And so you kind of need that stuff to get called out. I think this is where a lot of companies can struggle because even if you're good at documentation, you got to find the documentation, know how to follow it, keep the documentation up to date. We're always like, okay, how can we turn that documentation into automation? And so that's kind of the perspective we take as a team.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to add to that, like when we think about delivering product at a company at the scale of Workday, there's sort of that skill set aspect that Beau was hitting on of, okay, we have this new technology. We need to figure out how to get this to market. And my history at Workday is kind of bringing new product experiences or just products to market. And so a lot of times that looks like a cross-functional tiger team. You need to have kind of your PM dev team, pizza box and the design. And then ideally you have kind of a data scientist as well and ML for us to be able to do AI. And a lot of that was, okay, let's figure out early days. How do we get an MVP out, get to EA? Then from there, EA to GA is a journey in and of itself of, do we have the accessibility, the translations, all of the pieces we need to actually support our GA customers and say, yes, this is at an enterprise sort of grade, right? And then from there, there's kind of the scaling out, or increased adoption as well. And the people who work on those problems are different, right? People have different strengths. And so knowing who to kind of bring in for those initiatives and things helps a ton. And so early days, when we say Eliza, like the team was able to kind of come in and figure that problem out and then go in and sort of scale it and bring those learnings back to Beau's team and the platform side. And along with this kind of AI playbook, it was a KR that I had kind of set with our leadership team we've been able to then sort of educate and give a foundation for teams that they're wanting to, do a summarization feature, but they don't want to become an expert on GenAI, right? And so it gives them a way to say, here are the teams you need to talk to. Here's how you use the tech, and here are the approvals you need. And like, those are really big pieces to just getting things out the door a lot faster.
Are you able to tell us more about like what's in that playbook when you've tried to make it easier for other teams? Like, making the tech easier to understand. I can imagine a lot of things in there.
Totally.
What are some examples?
Yeah, it was pretty fun. And to be honest, it's continuing to evolve. Like, it's definitely not a one and done sort of thing. It's a combination of, I could try to kind of describe it. So it's landing page that we have, kind of like Google site, that has two tabs. One's the playbook. The other is partner teams. So the partner team side of the house is really important, right? To know your kind of ML sign off, your security, like all the different teams you need to work with. Beau's team on the platform side. And then as far as the playbook, a lot of it was, how do you identify an MVP use case, which is basically like, how can your team get your feet wet with this tech, but also do something that's valuable and differentiated? Because we can recreate things in ChatGPT, but every user has ChatGPT open, or or some one of those tools. And so us building those things in is not going to be valuable necessarily unless it becomes table stakes, which, there's nuance to any conversation. But a lot of it was, okay, how do you identify a great use case to start? And a lot of times it's not going to be like the most complicated, because then it's hard to manage the variables to get it out. Your team is using a new technology they haven't used before. So do something like summarization in a window, and that I know Beau's team had kind of rolled that out at a platform level early. But things that, for example, even on this podcast, like we're talking about translations with a knowledge article. That's something that people understand.
For sure.
You don't want to be there's definitely teams and room and space to do those more complex use cases, but that's the whole kind of walk before you run sort of thing that really recommend within there. And then some of it too is just those core product principles. So delivering, having an outcome that you're trying to identify, measuring that outcome, engaging with customers early, having them be partners on that sort of path. And then when you deliver to production, one of the things I'm excited about with AI and generative AI is the forcing function for product teams to really practice outcome-driven delivery, because you can't deliver. The quality of the AI is dependent on the quality of the actual usage and continued sort of feedback loop in the feature back into the model and such. And so that iteration is something that I think is a muscle that has to be practiced by a lot of teams, especially at scale too.
Yeah.
And so it kind of walks you through how to do each of those things and then work with the teams as well.
And that's the kind of stuff that I think we see. There's this progression in maturity that happens from people getting started and saying, hey, we think we know what we want to build, to then getting their hands dirty and starting to learn about prompt engineering, model selection, figuring out RAG architectures often, where they suddenly are becoming search, relevance ranking teams overnight and learning about retrieval optimization. Yeah. Then people start to figure out, they hear about evals and learn about quality. And, there's this stage where people go through not knowing, learning, and then trying to put all those things into practice and really get them right is really hard, right? Like, it often takes a lot more experimentation, a lot more energy than people expected. And that's part of what I think, like, I was trying to understand. It sounds like you're hitting some of that in the playbook. It turns into training, but like, how much are you getting into those sorts of things with other teams? Do you have best practices on prompt engineering and model selection? Are you providing, some kind of common platform for RAG architectures? Like, just where are you in the journey of those different tactics and helping scale them across the business?
Yeah, I would say we're trying all of those. I think the difficulty, right, is finding when something's this new, is finding the balance between what can be platform and generalized and what still needs to be a little unique and customized to the end use case. RAG is a good example, right? Like, I would assume any company who's playing with this is like immediately like, well, we need to build a generic RAG pipeline. And it's like, I think at a high level, sure. I think the difficulty, right, is realizing all of that.
That's all we need. Just like those two.
again, and I think we're going to see this with agents, right? Like there's these demos that look really, really good, but to get them to the level you need requires a little more precision. And that's why I think initially it really helps to have pretty dedicated, more like tiger teams, like Eliza was saying, where they can really get in there and figure that out. And then to me, more ideally, the platform teams are sitting there observing that and going, okay, what layers can we actually extract? Right. So like, for example, let's just take a generic RAG. Like I'm going to upload a document and eventually put that through some sort of indexing system and tie that all together. All right. Well, the process of uploading the document and storing it, all of that, that should be fairly easy to generalize. Like we can break that down. The actual way it gets indexed, that's right now we're learning much more nuanced, right? Like it's hard to have a generalized indexing system. And partly because they're even getting layers is another thing about being early, right? Is like, everybody's like, cool, I got it to index and work. And they're like, oh, now somebody's changed the document and uploaded it. And it's like, how do these things change over time? So like, that's the difficulty of platform and scaling this stuff is, you need precise enough use cases and you need them to ideally exist a little bit of time. So we don't build the wrong platform. And now we've spent all this money and time taking us down kind of the wrong path. And that's even back to your original thing on like prompting best practices and models, like that stuff that we want to, that is definitely stuff we're trying to keep up on. And I think at some level, I think our slice of the industry, the enterprise side is, I know outside, people are a little disappointed. They're like, where's GPT-5? Where's the next mind blowing thing? And on the enterprise side, we're kind of going, I don't mind that things have slowed down a bit. Like this helps us. One, there's a ton of value already to be extracted from where things are.
Yeah. I mean, here's
constant vanity.
Parts of your app where you're weaving in just easy like summarization.
Even if this is where AI plateaus as far as the capability, there's a ton of value to extract from this that companies can take advantage of. So, and we're not even close to getting there. There's so much time and money to effort to get in and do that well. But like things were moving so fast, it made it difficult for us to sit there and say, this is a best practice because it's already out of date. And that's where even doing documentation was hard.
And just to add to that, like that's something customers want too. Like think they're trying to operate, this is their core HR and finance system, and they don't want things changing constantly. That was way before GenAI, where they're expecting to have a consistent kind of experience there. And so it's allowed us to kind of control the rollout and increase adoption as well to be able to do that. One thing I forgot to mention before is one way that we design the product as well. Experiences right now are very much like chatbot on chatbot, kind of put in whatever you want. And so it was interesting when we're thinking about how do we roll this out was to actually add the prompts as configuration. So Workday, we are able to control and have the prompt engineering expertise. And that way you didn't need to have any sort of upskilling or training. We have customers who are doing that, right? But we need to be able to serve, from the SME, small, medium enterprise space up into larger enterprise. And a lot of folks don't know anything about this. And so to be able to say, click a button, generate an employee FAQ, as opposed to here's how you write a whole prompt for this model. And then that model changes, it allows us to kind of build out some standards to Beau's point.
Yeah, that's been interesting feedback, I think, from our actual customer exposed platform layers, is how many of those customers are like, I don't actually want to have to do the AI. Also, like, I just want to maybe configure the AI to meet my needs, but like, I don't want to have to go in there and write prompts either. Like, I don't want to have to do that. And so, yeah, it's been kind of fascinating. Like that's both true internally and externally, where like, just the level of knowledge it requires to do that. Folks want something a little easier and out of the box. And I think even going a step further with the user experience, that's been a big thing too, is that everybody's doing these chatbots. That's not necessarily the most impactful UX. And that's kind of what people are hearing. It's when you can embed the AI experience into the tooling and it just feels like product. It's not like I'm chatting. It seems to be going over better with folks. Like there are definitely use cases for chatbots and assistants. Don't get me wrong. Like that's definitely going to exist. It's just like this belief that everything is going to be that, I don't think is accurate. I think it's still going to be a combination. And I think we're still trying to figure all those user experiences out. But that kind of even getting back to all of this, like every layer in the stack is trying to figure this out. And I think that's part of the difficulty of this, and getting, especially the larger the company you are, anybody who's been in a large company knows how hard it is to get alignment across all these layers. Especially when it's not even, when you do have to start pulling in marketing and security and sales and all, like literally everybody. And that's been honestly even another fascinating thing to me is how kind of educated our customers are in their lack of knowledge as well. They're like, everybody knows what AI is at a high level, and they're all kind of hitting the same problems. And then they come to us asking questions, and they come to our salespeople, and they're like, I've honestly been surprised at like the depth of the questions coming in. And it's kind of a wide swath. You get kind of very generic, we don't know a ton, to actually, we're also trying to train and figure out how to do data security. So how are you doing it to ensure? It's a very wide swath that everybody has to wrap their head around again. And that's why I think, again, so much of our focus is like, how much can we just bake that into the system? So one, customers can have control of the abstraction that makes sense to them. That's a challenge, right? Is like, don't overcomplicate it. Make it easy enough for them to understand, but also give them the power and control they want, which is what they always want. But also to be able for us to quickly audit ourselves and allow the customers to audit ourselves of like, yeah, we are set up and configured in a safe way for everybody. Like it doesn't work if all of this has to be manual and has to go through, literally sales contracting every single time for this. Like that's just not going to scale again. And it's all tied together.
I mean, what you're describing, we're almost 2 years in since ChatGPT launched. We're kind of 18 months, a year in since a lot of big enterprises like Workday, first put a team like Eliza yours together, right? There's been these tip of the spear teams that got the charter to go figure out the first feature. Now we're hearing a lot of what you're describing. How do we scale this? How do we go wider? How do we get this to really work for anybody to ship to customers, not have it be a big deal? You mentioned putting configuration in front of your customers. Like you've got these great product experiences, there's just a button, right? I think we see that a lot of B2B SaaS that ends up being the best answer versus a chatbot. What are you letting them configure to feel good about, compliance and data privacy and, which models are making use of their data? Like I can imagine a whole set of concerns. How much of that do you expose to people? How have you thought about that with your customers? Because I'm sure they all care a lot.
Right now, I'd say it's pretty blunt. I would say one thing, Workday is a configurable system by default. That's kind of the value prop, is like we try to meet enterprises where they are, right? Like every enterprise runs their own way. And that's kind of where Workday came out of, is how can we allow you to map your business model to our software? And that requires a lot of configuration. So I think one, we have a little bit of an advantage of that's already kind of the mindset our customers come from, of like, yeah, we expect to be able to kind of configure these experiences and have like a high touch there. I think initially, and Eliza can maybe get into this more, it's still pretty high level and blunt at the moment, where it's pretty like, I don't want AI at all. I don't trust it yet. I don't. So I just want to flag off. But we need to make sure, like, because we're shipping this feature, like if it's not just even as simple as I've bought the help SKU, it's, I don't want AI within the help SKU. That's a little bit, I think probably back to even why we're not necessarily trying to make money off that or charge up for it, is it's like, no, we want to make sure we earn your trust and respect and all of this first before we even start thinking about those things. But it starts kind of at that level of like, hey, if you don't want this, because like we have to be on the risk averse side when it comes to data and security. We have to. Your data is critical. So it starts as simple as, I don't want anywhere near it. And you can just kind of start to work your way down in the complexity, but we're not exposing a lot of that yet. I think we're more likely to start once again internally with our own teams configuring that and going, okay, we need to make sure that we can turn this off based on X kind of configurations that already exist. That's the other thing. We're trying to tie them almost to existing kind of contracting and stuff that's built into the system and go, okay, can we from this infer, okay, they don't want to have any data being trained, right? And I think, again, that also helps that, once again, we already had an ML team going for a decade. So we've had to figure some of this out already. And it's more taking kind of what we had some tooling for and some process for, and figuring out how to scale that a little bit more broad. But to your point, like this applies to everything. It's finding that right abstraction where you don't overwhelm the customer, but give them the control they want. I mean, that's kind of software generally, and especially enterprise software, but it's just even harder with this. So yeah, I think that's the challenge. Yeah.
Going back to those three buckets of like the MVP to EA to GA, and then, the sort of scale rollout. I think that configuration in EA, not something we're solving for, because we're trying to land that core product experience. And so ideally we kind of source and recruit, the right subset of customers to sort of get a representation of the company, and we can land that core problem And then when we're moving from EA to GA, one of the things I didn't mention was the configuration side. And so, some of these are customer needs and some of them are legal and compliance requirements globally, so for us to operate in as many countries as we do, these are just things that we, it's part of kind of doing our jobs and being able to have that opt-in, opt-out for AI versus not. And I think GenAI just has exacerbated that, or I would say amplified it is maybe the right word, because of the kind of risk tolerance, customer by customer to generative AI, because, it's probabilistic and it's responses. And so it's up to us to figure out, how do we ensure accuracy? We can't be having, inaccurate answers coming back, right? From the assistant about your benefits, HR, hiring decisions. Like we have like core, really critical activities that are happening in the system. And so we want to take advantage of everything, especially I feel like on the consumer experience side is where it's really valuable, but we don't want to be compromising, anything with our customers and their data, and their trust. So
that gets all the way. That's another why you've seen struggle from like really fancy demos, or even what a lot of startups or kind of lower risk folks are doing compared to what enterprises have to do, is like that even applies at the technical level. Like very excited about agents, but agents aren't going to work if this stuff doesn't already exist there, because if you're going to just let an agent go and kind of maneuver around the system, it can't go places it can't go. Like that has to be ensured. And that starts as simple as the data layer, right? And I think that's why you're already seeing like, you see a lot of great demos where you have agents giving them full access to the database. And like, okay, when I step back as an engineer, especially like working in larger companies, so much of engineering isn't actually writing the code. It's understanding when I write that query in to get the data, I better be securing it properly. Like that's where we actually spend a lot of our time as engineers within companies, is at those types of layers versus actually writing the code. It's making sure the code is secure and returns the right data and returns the right experience. And so you're not going to be able to let agents go loose unless you already have a layer that provides that, right? So even taking out compliance and all that is like, you need to make sure you have these layers, these abstractions that don't let the AI go beyond it should go. Like it's Lisa and I talked about this a lot too, where it's almost like the opposite of how software's worked historically, where you spend all of your time trying to make it do one job, where AI is like, oh, I can do all sorts of crap. And now it's more like, how do I constrain it down to make sure it only does the jobs you're trying to have it do, and it can't go beyond that, right? And like, we always use the most basic examples of even a chatbot, where you're like, the nuanced difference between, as a manager, where I'm like, hey, show me, the salaries of my team. Like, I want to ask that all the time as a manager, but as an employee, I better not be able to say, hey, show me all the salaries of my team. Right. And like, those are like that. And if you're just like, oh, let's have it generate a SQL query to go ask that, like, that sounds amazing. That demo's amazing. That is much harder to do in practice. And so I can use like a very technical version of that I, like I said, all of these demos and blogs you read are showing that exact use case. It's like, cool, that will never work with an enterprise. You're going to be spending all of your time figuring out how to take that concept and actually productionize that and do that in a safe and secure way. And like I said, that applies to everything. Like that's why we're trying to kind of turn as much of this into technology as we can, because we do see that power, and it's only going to work if it can actually be programmatical and it's safe for the AIs to take advantage of.
Yeah. You're going to have plenty of work to do as a platform team for a while on those fronts.
Yeah. I laugh at all of the fear over engineers. Yes, like writing code is like AI. Like, I mean, I use like Cursor and all of that stuff, and it's great because I actually don't enjoy writing React components all day. So it's great to have it just do that for me. I actually enjoy what I was just talking about, trying to figure out, is this safe? Is this actually providing the proper product experience that we expect? That's the part of engineering I like. That to me is not going anywhere. And if anything, is just getting harder. But the actual scope of just writing the code, that's getting easier, but that makes me happy.
That's awesome. No, I'm sure a lot of people will be encouraged to hear that. It's kind of our view of the world too. But I know we're running close on time. I appreciate you both taking the time. Any parting thoughts, just as you think about the future, things other people in your shoes should know? Kind of love to hear your final thoughts on the conversation. And yeah, it's been great talking with you.
Yeah, I'll start. I feel like if there's one recommendation that I have for folks, it's that you can use this technology now if you have a phone. And I think being able to figure out, maybe take some time to reflect on like, what are you great at? What's your expertise in? What is your core competency as a business? And then using some of these general purpose tools to figure out the bounds. It's going to teach you a lot more than anything you're going to read about any of the technology. And that'll really help you. I'm maybe speaking to PMs and just product teams too. It'll help you understand which models make sense, for your discipline, how to apply the tech. There's a lot behind that, but if you have a phone, you can do this now. Like that's what the democratization of this is pretty incredible. On the Workday side, we serve 60% of the Fortune 500. And if you are using Workday now and want to learn more or just interested in our company and what we do, workday.com/AI has a ton of content. We've got an AI masterclass, Workday Illuminate that I talked about, the assistant that I'm working on right now with a huge, incredible team. We're an early adopter. I mean, we actually we're kind of powered by Illuminate. And so that'll be releasing early next year as well. And so if you haven't turned on the assistant, we have really revamped things. And so I'd encourage you to check it out as well.
Awesome. Any final thoughts from your side, Beau?
It might almost be even a story to myself to remind myself of like, I like to go fast and things to be crazy and chaotic. And at times it can feel like things are moving so slow. And then I get reminded, like so many companies are struggling, to your point, and you said, you guys seem to be a little bit ahead of the curve relative to others. And it's like, yeah, I think that's been my biggest realization over the last year is how hard this is for everybody. This is not simple, and how I think critical it is for companies to figure out how to enable their teams to kind of do what we just talked about for the last hour. Like, how can you let them play and get their hands on their stuff in meaningful ways, figure out how to apply it to their use cases. I think to Eliza's point, she said it a lot, like the last 20 years of software are really understanding like the best practice of that are going to be really critical moving forward. Good APIs and platforms, understanding how to do good product and quantify results. That just becomes even more critical. So at some level, beyond just learning AI, make sure you're good at the core competencies, because like you are going to have to rely on those already being there to really be able to take advantage of this stuff. But yeah, it's for me, it's like just a kind of a reminder of like, yeah, this is actually the hard part. The playing around is fun. I love all those fancy demos, but this is what they actually pay us all for. And so yeah, figuring out how to get from fun to actually delivering that customer value is kind of the place I feel like a lot of us are in right now, and it's awesome.
Well, I mean, it's a good closing thought, I think, as everybody tries to figure out how to make generative AI real in big enterprises. You all have shared a bunch of good learnings. Thank you. Again, people watching, if you're a Workday customer, go check out Workday AI. And thank you both, Eliza and Beau, for the time.
Definitely. Thanks for having us.
All right, that's all we have for today's episode of Deployed, the AI product podcast. I'm Ian Cairns, the CEO and co-founder of FreePlay. I hope you enjoyed listening. And if you did, we'd love to hear about it. Your reviews mean a lot. They help other listeners. So give us a like, share, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this. And if something stood out to you in the episode, or if you've got feedback or ideas for a future episode, or if you simply just want to learn more we're up to at FreePlay, shoot me a note. I'm Ian at freeplay.ai. You can also find me on Twitter @Cairns. Thanks so much for listening.